In the United States military, the Purple Heart is awarded for being wounded or killed in action against an enemy of the United States. The Bronze Star is awarded for heroic achievement in a combat zone. These medals represent blood, sacrifice, and the loss of innocence. They are usually pinned on the chests of grown men, fathers, husbands, hardened soldiers. But in 1942, these medals belonged to a private named Calvin Leon Graham. When Calvi looked in the mirror, he didn't see a man. He saw a boy who hadn't even started shaving yet. He was 5 feet 2 inches tall. He weighed 125 pounds, and he was 12 years old. While other kids his age were playing stickball or worrying about their math homework, Calvin Graham was manning a 20mm anti-aircraft gun on the deck of the USS South Dakota. He was pulling grown men out of fires. He was taking shrapnel to the face. He was watching his friends die. He is the youngest decorated war hero in modern American history. But when he came home, there were no parades. There was no GI Bill. There was no hero's welcome. Instead, the U.S. Navy threw him in a military prison. They stripped him of his medals. They dishonorably discharged him. They tried to erase him from history. Hi, I'm Ray. We often talk about the greatest generation, but we forget that some of that generation were literally children who grew up too fast. Why did a 12-year-old boy run away to war? How did he fool the doctors, the recruiters, and the entire U.S. Navy? And why did the country he bled for turn its back on him? Today on G.I. Stories, we are telling the heartbreaking, infuriating, and incredible true story of the baby veteran. Chapter 1. The Escape Artist. To understand why a child would run toward machine gun fire, you have to look at what he was running away from. Calvin Graham was born in Kenton, Texas in 1930. He was a child of the Great Depression. It was a hard time, but for Calvin, the hardness was inside his own home. His father died, and his mother, by all accounts, his stepfather was an abusive man. Calvin and his older brother lived in a house filled with shouting and fear. For Calvin, the war wasn't something happening in Europe or Asia. It was happening at the dinner table. He learned to be tough, to hide his pain, and to look for an exit. Then came Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. The entire country was electrified. It was war fever. Every radio station, every movie newsreel was talking about fighting the Japs and the Nazis. For a boy like Calvin, seeing these soldiers in crisp uniforms, looking strong and respected, it looked like freedom. It looked like a brotherhood, something he never had at home. He was 11 years old when Pearl Harbor happened. He started planning. He realized he looked older than he was. He was already shaving barely. He had a deep voice for a kid. He started practicing walking with a swagger, talking tough, mimicking the older boys in town. In August 1942, just after his 12th birthday, Calvin made his move. He told his mother he was going to visit relatives. Instead, he walked into a recruitment office. First, he tried the army. They took one look at him and laughed. "Go home, kid!" Then he tried the Marines. They checked his teeth and realized he still had baby molars. "Nice try, son!" But Calvin was stubborn. He walked into the Navy recruiting station in Houston. Now, you have to understand the Navy in 1942. They were losing ships fast. They needed bodies. The recruiters had quotas to fill. They weren't looking too closely at the birth certificates. Calvin didn't have a birth certificate. He forged his mother's signature on a consent form. He stole a notary stamp from a local hotel to make it look official. When he stood in line for the physical exam, he was terrified. He was 5 feet 2. The dentist asked him how old he was. Calvin looked him in the eye and lied. "I'm 17, sir. Just born late in the year." The dentist knew. Of course he knew, but maybe he saw the desperation in the kid's eyes. Or maybe he just wanted to go to lunch. APA said him. On August 15th, 1942, Calvin Graham was sworn into the United States Navy. He was a 12-year-old sailor. Chapter 2. The Floating City Boot Camp in San Diego was brutal. Drill instructors screamed in their faces. They ran miles in the sand. Whatever childishness Calvin had left, the Navy beat it out of him. He learned to curse, to smoke, to march, and to keep his mouth shut. He lived in constant fear of being discovered. He showered quickly. He avoided talking about school. He became a master of camouflage. After training, he was assigned to a ship, and not just any ship. He was assigned to the USS South Dakota, BB-57. This was the lead ship of her class, a fast battleship. She was brand new, bristling wheat 16-inch guns that could hurl a Volkswagen-sized shell over the horizon. She was a floating fortress of steel and oil. To a 12-year-old boy from rural Texas, the South Dakota must have seemed like a spaceship. It was a labyrinth of pipes, ladders, and bulkheads. It was a labyrinth of pipes, ladders, and bulkheads. Calvin was assigned as a loader for a 40mm anti-aircraft gun, and later a 20mm gun. His job was simple: pass the heavy ammunition clips to the gunner. Life at sea was a strange mix of boredom and terror. Calvin fit in. The older sailors, mostly 18 or 19 years old themselves, treated him like a little brother. They called him Babyface, but they respected him because he worked hard. Whatever abuse he had suffered at home, this was better. Here, he had 3 meals a day. He had a bunk. He had friends. He had a purpose. But the South Dakota wasn't going on a cruise. She was heading straight into the Ironbottom Sound. He was heading to Guadalcanal. Imagine yourself at 12 years old. What was your biggest problem? A math test. A bully at recess. Now imagine standing on a steel deck in the middle of the ocean, waiting for a Japanese Zero to dive bomb. It is almost impossible to comprehend the mental state of Calvin Graham. We are dedicated to preserving these stories because they are fading away. If you believe we should remember heroes like Calvin, please like this video and subscribe to G.I.Stories. Now, let's go to the darkest night of Calvin's life. Chapter 3. Into the Meat Grinder. By late 1942, Guadalcanal was a meat grinder. The U.S. Marines were holding on to a tiny airstrip Henderson Field, while the Japanese Army threw everything they had at them. The Navy's job was to stop the Japanese from landing reinforcements. Calvin's first taste of blood came at the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands in October 1942. The South Dakota was protecting the carrier USS Enterprise. Japanese dive bombers swarmed the fleet. For the first time, Calvin heard the sound of war. It wasn't like the movies. It was a deafening, terrifying roar. The sky turned black with flak. The South Dakota put up a wall of steel. Calvin was passing ammo clips as fast as his small arms could move. The ship was hit. A 500-pound bomb struck the main turret. Shrapnel flew. Men screamed, but they survived. The South Dakota shot down a record 26 enemy planes that day. The crew felt invincible. They painted victory marks on the bridge. But the Japanese Navy wasn't done. They were preparing a massive surface fleet to crush the Americans at Guadalcanal once and for all. And on the night of November 14, 1942, the South Dakota sailed into a trap. Chapter 4. The Night of Hell. This is one of the few battleship-on-battleship fights of the war. The U.S. task force, led by the battleship Washington and the South Dakota, engaged a Japanese fleet led by the battleship Hiroshima. It happened at night. At 11 p.m., the power on the South Dakota failed. A circuit breaker tripped. The radar went blind. The guns couldn't track. The ship was effectively blind and deaf. In the middle of a knife fight, the Japanese ships turned their searchlights on the South Dakota. She was lit up like a Christmas tree. Then, hell opened up. The Hiroshima and heavy cruisers hammered the South Dakota. In minutes, the ship was hit 42 times by heavy shells. Calvin Graham was at his station. A shell exploded near his position. The shockwave threw him against the steel bulkhead. He felt a burning sensation in his face. Shrapnel had torn through his jaw and mouth. Another piece hit him in the leg. He was bleeding profusely. His teeth were shattered. He had third-degree burns. Annie 12-year-old boy, Annie, grown man, frankly would have curled up and cried. Calvin didn't. Through the smoke and the blood choking him, he saw sailors falling off the upper decks, dangling by their safety harnesses, burning. Calvin got up. Ignoring his own pain, he started pulling men to safety. He used his belt to make tourniquets for sailors whose legs had been blown off. He gave them cigarettes, which he smoked himself. He dragged the wounded into the mess hall, which had become a makeshift triage center. He worked all night. He was covered in his own blood and the blood of his brothers. When the dawn broke, the South Dakota was a smoking ruin, but she was still afloat. The USS Washington had saved her by sinking the Curie ship. Calvin Graham collapsed. He had survived the deadliest night of naval combat in the war. Chapter 5. The Unmasking for his bravery. Calvin was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. The South Dakota returned to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for repairs. The press called her Battleship X to hide her identity, but the crew were heroes. Newsreel cameras filmed the crew. Calvin, proud of his service, smiled for the cameras. Back in Texas, Calvin's mother went to the movies. Before the main feature, a newsreel played. She saw a flash of a smiling boy on a battleship deck. "That's Calvin." She immediately called the War Department. "My son is only 12. Bring him home." The Navy was embarrassed. They had sent a 7th grader into combat. Instead of treating him as a hero or a victim of a mistake, they treated him as a criminal. They arrested him. They didn't send him home. They sent him to the brig at Corpus Christi, Texas. For 3 months, the hero of Guadalcanal sat in a cell. The Navy stripped him of his medals. They revoked his disability benefits. And finally, they gave him a dishonorable discharge. This is the worst stamp a soldier can get. It means you are disgraced. It makes it hard to get a job, a loan, or respect. He was released at age 13. He had no education, no money, and a criminal record from the Navy he had risked his life for. Chapter 6. The long war at home. Calvin tried to go back to school. Can you imagine? You've seen men blown apart by artillery. You've smoked cigarettes while shielding friends from shrapnel. And now you have to sit in a 7th grade classroom and listen to a teacher talk about algebra. He couldn't do it. He dropped out. At age 14, he married and became a father. B.D.17, he was divorced. He struggled with alcohol. He struggled with nightmares. Today, we call it PTSD. Back then, they just called him troubled. He spent decades working odd jobs, welder, taxi driver, but he carried a deep bitterness. He didn't want money. He wanted his honor back. For 30 years, he wrote letters to Congress. He asked simply to have his discharge upgraded to honorable so he could get medical help for his war injuries. The government ignored him. Finally, in 1978, President Jimmy Carter reviewed the case. He announced that Calvin Graham would be given an honorable discharge. Calvin finally got some of his benefits back, but not his medals, and not his Purple Heart. It wasn't until 1994, 52 years after the battle, that the Navy finally relented. President Bill Clinton signed the order. The Bronze Star was returned to him. The Purple Heart was pinned on his chest again. Actually, it's even sadder. Calvin died in 1992 of heart failure. He died knowing he was a hero, but without his Purple Heart in his hand. It was presented to his widow 2 years after his death. The Navy fought him until the grave. Conclusion: Calvin Graham's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Was he wrong to lie? Yes. But did he serve with more courage than most adults? Absolutely. Absolutely. When the shells were falling and the ship was burning, the enemy didn't care that he was 12. And Calvin didn't act like he was 12. He gave his childhood to his country, and in return, his country stole his reputation. It serves as a reminder that the bureaucracy of war is often colder than the war itself. We salute you, Seaman Graham. You were the toughest kid to ever sail the 7 seas. Rest in peace. This story is hard to swallow. Do you think the Navy was right to punish him for lying? Or should they have treated him as a hero from the start? I want to hear your opinion in the comments. This one makes me angry. If you want to support our channel in telling these untold stories, please subscribe and share this video. This is Ray. Stay safe out there.